recording. I don't think I've ever started recording that quickly. That might be a new record. Fucking recording, bud. But yeah. Now, did you get a haircut? Did you get a haircut?
I trimmed my bangs.
Fucking looks great, man.
Well, thanks. Yeah, you know what I do is when they start to get in my eyes, I stand in front of the mirror with it wet after I bathe, and I take a pair of scissors and I do that because I've been doing that for most of my life. So,
well,
I've saved a shitload of money on barbers.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you can fucking see, I don't know why it matters, right? My mom.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anyone does with my hair because I've got a cowlick up in the front, and I used to get normal haircuts when I was a kid, a teenager, and when I first started college. But no matter what they would do, it would look great when I left the barbershop, and then when I got up the next morning, it would just be like nuclear disaster.
Yeah, you just got to embrace it.
So I just was like, fuck it. Yeah, I just
embrace the madness. Yeah, I had my mom cut my hair today because I was starting to look like I had fucking horns coming out the back because my hair is growing. And I was like, I just look dumber and dumber. And normally I wouldn't give a shit, but I was like, because it's not like anyone sees me. And it's like, well, I am doing a podcast now, and I kind of look like I definitely look like a guy that's about ready to bring a 12 gauge into an office park. And but hey, wave to the NSA, I guess that's got to be a record too, right? First 90 seconds, wave to the NSA. Haven't had one of those in a while, but yeah, just wave to the boys. I know they're watching. I know I've got more subscribers than I think. I know they're watching. Shout out to everybody at Langley, or no, not Langley, Fort Meade. But yeah, no, it's yeah. Thanksgiving was good. Did some podcasts on the couch. Talking about aliens and Alex Jones, naturally.
Yeah, caught a little of that.
Little Thanksgiving, classic Thanksgiving, talking about interdimensional demons. When I say we, I mean me and my cousin and everyone else there. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, good family shit. But what are we talking about today, Roger? You sent me a link. Well, you sent me an email, but you didn't send a link. You said you should watch this.
Well, I have. Yeah, when you get a chance, you ought to watch that video. That's Kaizo Trap, and it is a video homage to the Mario Brothers hacked copies that were done by the Japanese that are like super, super difficult. And it's an animated short of a girl and her boyfriend who get sucked into the Nintendo and repeatedly have to play through this game. It's a Mario side scroller until she can rescue him. And it's just brutal and it's hilarious. You will love it.
Dude, I'm listening.
And the way that I found out about it is that during the first boss fight, which you'll know when you see it, there are passages from the Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect being projected on the wall behind the girl and her boyfriend who are fighting like the two bosses in a Mario game. So it's like, but you'll see what I mean when you get a chance to watch. It's about 5 minutes long.
I got you.
And it's absolutely hilarious.
Fuck yeah, man. Yo, have you? I don't know why I asked. Have you? Because I haven't put you in touch with that Audible narrator I had on. You need to get Mopey narrated. Yeah,
well, I need to. I don't think he ever sent me his email address or any contact info.
I'm gonna send you a text right now, or I'm gonna send myself a text as a reminder.
Yeah, because I want to talk to him about making the what it would take to make the arrangements. I also was thinking of doing another experiment where I would read a story to you on the blog here to sort of.
I'm sorry, I'm texting you right now. I can't multitask. Please. Oh, that is not. That's not Roger. That is my cousin Ryan. I just said, I'll let you know about the narrator. My cousin that lives in Alaska that I haven't seen in 20 years. It's going to be like, is this code? Do you have the plutonium core? That you know. Okay, I'm texting you right now. Let you know about narrator.
What's the frequency, Kenneth?
Yeah. Wave to the NSA. His name's Noah Levine. Okay.
Something came through my phone.
Yeah,
I heard it.
That's got to be it. So.
Okay. But what I was saying is I had an idea. There's another story that I wrote that's not very long, but is a more self-contained story than the excerpts that I read for you that a couple of podcasts ago. And I was thinking about trying to just do the whole thing as a presentation, just sort of see how it goes, doing it in my voice.
Fuck yeah.
Because I wasn't real happy with the way some of that came out, but I also wasn't trying very hard. So
I thought it was great. Yeah. Dude. It's as long as the author can never do a bad job because it's the author, and other people can do bad. But like I've told you, there is the author. To me, I've never found that the author can do it poorly because it's the author, and it's just. But
I liked a lot of the points that your guy made about. For one thing, that he had an acting background, which I thought that really resonated, and of course I don't. But I have had people tell me that they thought I would do well in radio, but I would have to do some practice and get rid of some verbal artifacts and tics and stuff.
No, nonsense. You've said that before to me, listening to your voice on here. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? I think your voice is fine.
Well, one of the things I might also do is drag out the good microphone, because Elaine did buy one of those microphones with the puff shield and everything that you do to do a professional job. So this is terrible. I mean, this thing is 12 years old, and the puff shield, the little bit of foam that went over the microphone, disintegrated. But the reason that I'm still using it is I can't find anyone who sells a set of headphones with a boom mic. They all have these things. My wireless Pesh 2s that I use to listen to music, they're Bluetooth. They have a microphone in them, but it's crap. I mean, because it's up here in the earphone pieces somewhere. I mean, it's like, how the hell does it even work?
Yeah. They don't sell those anymore?
I haven't been able to find a pair. I mean, it may be one of those things if I went online and found a specialty shop or something, but just like going down to Office Depot or something, though, or Best Buy, not that I've found.
Gaming headphones. I think gaming headphones still have them. I don't know, though. I'm old now, so I don't know what's hip.
They might. Yeah, that's an idea, but also gaming stuff tends to be real overpriced for what you're getting.
Yeah, Turtle Beach headphones. I know that name. I know Turtle Beach is like the primo line. But if I know that, then that means it's probably not true, because I'm not a hardcore gamer. So whatever I know is noob level, right? So I'm just eating up. I'm like, it's a new Apple. It's fast, right?
Yeah, you've been advertised.
Yeah, I've been fucked. I've bent over and I've taken the long dick of capitalism, like a good boy. Well,
and now you get ads for Grand Marnier all the time.
Grand Marnier, I've been sending you those, dude. I fucking get them nonstop now.
That's hilarious.
It's nonstop. But none of the other ads have continued. I haven't worked at the liquor store for a month now. I don't get any of the other ads. I don't get any more Grey Goose ads. I don't get any more Dogfish Head ads. But the Grand Marnier...
That suggests that they're scanning the photos with the AI probably when they're uploaded into the cloud. Now that you're not uploading them anymore, even though they're stored, they're probably not getting scanned.
But why does the Grand Marnier keep coming through?
Probably the advertising strategy of the company.
Probably.
Because what I suspect they're doing is they're using an algorithm to see, they've probably got a bunch of companies signed up to see if their logos occur in these photos they're not supposed to be scanning. and then, they probably each have their own little arrangement with how much they pay and how many impressions they do and stuff like that. So, but I mean, actually, I've told a few people about that, and I actually like Grand Marnier. It's a dessert liqueur. It's something that you would have like a big snifter with a shot or two in the bottom, so that you get the aroma and all. And it's an orange liqueur, so it's made from oranges, and it's very sweet and not it's like maybe 40 proof. It's related to like amaretto and frangelica and things like that. But and they're also used in cocktails where you would want a bit of sweetness or a bit of flavor. But it's not a cheap liqueur. It's probably, I'm going to say, costs about as much, maybe a little more than Jack Daniel's by the fifth.
I've never had it, but what I always liked about it is stocking it. It sounds retarded, but like the glass on the bottles was different. And remember, this is from an expert liquor store stocker, right? So I touched a lot of bottles, right? I probably spread COVID to more people than anyone else on the Eastern Seaboard, right? Because I was just grabbing bottles, putting them up. How many people are drinking those, taking those little shots? I probably gave COVID to, who knows? I probably am responsible for all of the deaths in America.
You're a one-man pandemic.
I am a one-man. Fuck. Blue eyes, pale skin. Fuck it. Ich kann einschuden müssen rotten. But yeah,
I got a funny story about those dessert liqueurs.
Oh, but the glass. Sorry, the glass.
Yes, the glass.
There was something about the glass that if you bumped those bottles together, even lightly, there was just like a satisfying thud. It wasn't like a clink. It wasn't clink. Even the big Jack Daniels, like the 1.75s, those were still heavy, but like they still had that clink, clink, clink. The Grand Marnier, something about them is just they had a satisfying just.
Yeah, those bottles are thick.
Yeah,
you'll see some of the fanciest bottles that you'll see on a normal liquor store shelf are for things like dessert liqueurs and all, because they're trying to differentiate themselves.
Yeah,
you see, like Frangelica has the long, tall bottle, and you see some of them are real thick like that. Some of the tequilas also have real fancy glassware.
Michael Jordan's,
But anyway, about 20 years ago, our Jackson, Mississippi branch manager took me and one of the other technicians to dinner at the really nice restaurant. Now in Jackson, Mississippi, this is like, where all of the like state politicos hang out, because he liked to schmooze these guys. And it was a very decent steakhouse. I mean, even though it's in Jackson, Mississippi, but the thing is, they have full bar. And for dessert, I ordered myself an amaretto because David was paying for it.
Sure.
And David and Kevin are these people. It's like, to them, the height of elegance in drinking is to order a Crown.
Okay.
That is like there's Rot Gut and there's Crown.
Yeah.
Those are the two brands of liquors that they know about.
Yeah.
And so they're looking at me, sip this, amaretto, and then they're like, "What is that?" And I was like, "You guys have never had this?" It's like, I tell you what. So I called the waiter over and I said, "Tell you what, get him an amaretto and get him a Grand Marnier," just to show what they are. These two guys accused me of trying to poison them.
Really?
They're like, I mean, no adventure. They took one sip and went, "Oh my God!" It's like, dude, it's like a freaking candy bar with alcohol in it. What are you?
What is I don't think I've ever had a liqueur. I'm trying to think.
They're very sweet.
Okay.
And they're not as alcoholic as a bourbon. Most of them are about maybe 40 proof. So they're more alcoholic than wine. They do have they are distilled, but they also have a lot of sugar left in them and a lot of flavor things from whatever was fermented to make them in the first place. So they're very similar to brandy. In fact, brandy is might be considered a liqueur made of grapes, as opposed to wine, which is just a fermented drink. And a lot of the recipes are secret. Like the recipe for amaretto is like 400 years old, and it's this big secret. Amaretto is made of almonds, by the way. I think. So they all have their special ingredient and their recipe, and some of them are combinations. They're really the two ways that you would have them would be to sip like as a dessert, and you wouldn't sit there drinking it all night. For one thing, it would be 1,000 calories if you did that, because there's a lot of sugar left in them. And the other thing you would do with them is use them as an ingredient in a cocktail, where you would have a bunch of other stuff in there, and that's your flavoring element for some of the specialty stuff. They're kind of an acquired thing. My wife is a big fan of them. In fact, a lot of times that's what I'll get her for, because we've got everything else. We don't have room for shit. So we get each other alcohol for our birthdays and Christmas, and so I'll get her a bottle of Frangelica or something. And but it was just funny because you got these two guys who are much more redneck than they realize, and their response to being introduced to a new form of liquor that they had never experienced before was, "This is awful, man! You're trying to poison this. It's like it's full of sugar. It's like it's a dessert with alcohol in it." So I ended up drinking their aperitifs too.
Fuck yeah! I always loved in Valdosta when they'd really treat themselves. They'd go for like they'd go for Bud Heavy instead of Natty Light or whatever the fuck it was. It was like, tonight's a special occasion. It's like,
Yeah, right.
Oh, you gonna go meet her parents first? Like, I got the Budweiser. I got the Camel hundreds, and it's like,
well, man, it's like,
who's the lucky lady?
I ordered her a Crown, man. That shit comes in a bag. It's classy.
Yeah. I used to I would wear a Crown thing as my mask when I worked at the liquor store. I'm not kidding. My mom sewed it together.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah, and I would wear that, and people would be, I don't know, they'd be like, "Is that a real Crown?" I'd be like, "Yeah, it's a Crown mask." They'd be like, "Wow." I'd be like, "It comes with every bottle," and they'd be like, "No shit," and I'd just be like, "It's just a Crown bottle."
You find someone who drinks a lot of Crown, and it's like they have everything known to man been made out of those things.
My entire family in New England, Crown is the currency up there. I'm not kidding you. We have a quilt at our lake house. Roger, I am not exaggerating when I say it's probably 4 feet tall, and I'm not no bullshit, 9 feet long.
All Crown bags.
I mean, this thing's got to be over 100 bags of Crown. It's insane. I'm not exact. It is insane. It is, yeah. But point being, there was no point.
So anyway, yeah.
Grand Marnier, all hail big data.
Yeah, that was a nice little aside. Okay, so what I had planned to talk about today is something that should be really simple: measuring length. Nothing fancy like weight, where you've got this kind of mystery behind it, and the scale is kind of like the revealer of truth. No. How long is something?
Right.
How hard? Yeah. Okay. But more, I'm going to be talking about how to mess that up.
Okay. And I'm already thinking of like problems. Yeah. Right. Because weight wouldn't be mass, obviously. So even on a planet, you could say that the gravity's not all the same. But length.
How do you mess that up?
How do you fuck that up? Yeah.
All right. So, in fact, the first thing that I'm going to show you is something I don't have to show you, because I was going to show you a cheap plastic ruler, and I realized gathering stuff up for this that I don't have any more of them, because the last one finally broke and I never replaced it because they're so crap. Yeah. But the thing about it is, these cheap plastic rulers, it cost about $1. You get it at the 5 and dime. And I remember when I was a kid and my dad taught physics, and one year he went down to the 5 and dime and bought a bundle of these cheap plastic rulers so he could pass them out, and so all of his students could have one in the lab. And when we got them back to the lab and held them up against the good steel ruler, they were wrong. I mean, brand new.
Like scaled? Like overall length? Or
yeah, like they were the wrong fucking length. It's like, you lost.
Roger? Did we just lose Roger? You're back. You're back. You froze up. You disappeared. You said the wrong length, and then you froze.
They were the wrong length. Yeah, it's like you lined up the 1 inch and then the 11 inch. And my dad and I were just like, how do you fuck up a foot ruler? This is, I mean, but the thing is, this is why we have
Roger, you're blinking in and out of reality here.
And call them on it.
Hey, Roger, your connection's blinking in and out. You're back now.
Well, let me close the.
I just shut down my other programs. Maybe
the only other thing I got running was Netscape, but
might have been me. Oh, whatever. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. So how do they fuck up length?
Yeah, I mean, how do you make a foot ruler that ain't the right length and get it into the drugstore and actually sell it to people? I mean, so this is why we have standards bodies and compliance checks and all this, and all this stuff that is almost comically, you would wonder, why the hell do you have it? And this is where we're going to go today.
Fuck yeah.
So, tape measures. Okay? My company used to be just mostly a scale company, and about 10 years ago we started branching out. We started with torque wrenches, which need to be calibrated. It's a common industrial thing. But then we started branching out into other lab stuff, because people who have scales have torque wrenches. People who have torque wrenches have other devices like that. And so one of the services we offer is we will calibrate a tape measure. Now, what?
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, I have 2 tape measures here, this one is about 30 years old. I've been using it for much of my life. This is a brand new one that was given to me as swag last year by one of our manufacturers. And sure enough, I laid them out, and they're not the same length. Now, you don't think about this. It's a steel tape. How does it? Well, steel is not perfectly stable. And a lifetime of being wound and allowed to do that has stretched this very slightly. So you get out about 3 feet, and you can tell that the hash marks are no longer in the same place. And now, for most of what people use these for, it wouldn't matter much, but sometimes it does. And so, the company I work for will calibrate your tape measure. Now, when it turns out that it's wrong, there's not exactly a knob you can turn to go back and fix it. So what you generally do is that, it's like, what else can you do? But at least you know that what you're working with is correct.
Yeah.
So that's where we are with some of this stuff. But now, if you think about it with an inch ruler like that, I've got a couple of things. I have a foot ruler that is not a piece of shit. This is an engineer's drafting ruler. And you can see the cross section is made so that when you sit it on a piece of paper, the marks get very close to the paper so that you can do a good, accurate job of marking your length and tracing it. And the different scales are actually not like inches and centimeters. They're all inches. There's a primary inch scale here. I don't know if you can make it out.
Mm-hmm.
These are,
yeah.
Okay. The other scales are also inches, but they're fractional. So like you'll notice that scale has a 10 by it.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think that's on the end here.
Uh-huh.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. If we go to, all right, the next one over is the 30. And this one has 3 pseudo inches per real inch. So 30 is thirds of an inch. The next one over here is 20, which is half inches. And what this was used for is doing 3-dimensional projections on a drafting table. So you would do your, like if you want to draw a 3-dimensional drawing of something,
okay.
You would draw like your face of your cube, then you would get your triangle to put this at an angle, and you would use one of the shortened scales to draw your offsets going off into the z-axis. So you don't have to do math. You can just use the original dimensions, but draw your drawing with the perspective or the projection. And so this thing is actually fairly accurate, and it was probably about $10 40 or 50 years ago. So that is an example of a non-cheap foot ruler. I thought I had a steel ruler, but I don't. And I also have a little curiosity here. The DigiKey electronics retailer sent these out as swag to all of their customers for a few months. This is a circuit board. It's a ruler made out of a circuit board.
Oh.
So they basically drew this ruler in a CAD program and sent it to their circuit board manufacturer and told them to make a bunch of them. And it is actually pretty accurate. It's got a whole bunch of reference stuff here, and it's got different pads and holes. So if you're actually designing electronics, there's a lot of cute stuff here. But the length measurements are also pretty accurate because the measurements for circuit boards have to be pretty accurate for everything to register. So they didn't have to do anything special to make an accurate ruler. They already had the accuracy built into this mass manufacture process. And they were just like, yeah, let's make a buttload of rulers and send them to all of our engineer nerd friends. So now the thing about foot rulers and tape measures and stuff like that is that you're dependent on your visual acuity and the size of the marks to get your accuracy. And if you think you're doing better than a 32nd of an inch, then you're fooling yourself because you're not going to be able to mark things that accurately. You're not going to be able to set things. So that's about the limit. Even with the reading glasses and all, it's really more for 1/16 of an inch and things like that. When you get down to needing a little more, this is a dial gauge. And this guarantees 1/100th of an inch.
Fuck.
And as you can maybe see here, I can't tell because I'm looking at a thumbnail of myself.
Yeah.
But if you can see the dial twirling around in there, that gives your hundredths of an inch as you slide.
Roger,
this,
I can help you see you better. On the top right hand, you should see a little, like it says gallery view. Do you see that? If you're on Zoom,
view gallery view.
Click on that.
Okay. Oh yes.
Yeah, I didn't figure that out until 200 episodes in.
Yeah. So you can make out that needle is spinning around, and when it's at home, it's pointed at 0, which is upside down here because they did the dial.
So how do you use it? Like, is there?
Okay, well, it's neat because you can use this. It's a very versatile little thing. You can use this to do outside measurements, like what's the diameter of this thing.
Okay.
But using these tines up here, you can do inside measurements, like what's the inside diameter of a hole, and using this part that sticks out the end, you can do depth. So you can do the depth of a hole or the thickness of a plate. And if you're doing something that's hard, like metal, then this thing pretty much does what it says on the can. It gives you accuracy of 1/100th of an inch. You can also pull this little trick with it. You can set your forks around something and tighten this little knob here, and that locks it in place.
Okay. So
then you can go look for something that fits in here or compare it with something else to see if it's bigger or smaller. This is a pretty mature instrument. There's a simpler form of it called a Vernier Caliper, where instead of the dial, you have a secondary static like rule. And the way that the Vernier works is it's got 10 hash marks in the space where you would normally have 9. And you get your 2 significant figures the normal way, but then you look at the Vernier the Vernier gauge to see which of the hash marks exactly aligns with one of the main hash marks. And which one of those lines up tells you the next significant figure. So you can also, with a simple Vernier gauge like this, you can also get 1/100th of an inch, and you can reliably read it. Can you
walk me through the gauge?
Okay.
I was thinking that it was like some sort of like, I don't know why, like air pressure, like you use that to turn it so you can get down to hundredths.
Oh no. See this little knurled knob here?
Yeah.
I'm using that to roll it back and forth.
Then is that the reading of the hundredths?
Yeah. But if you watch the dial, if you see it goes around 1 revolution, that is 1/10 of an inch.
Okay.
If you look at the main gauge here, which is a little harder because it's engraved, you will see that it is at the 1/10 of an inch mark. Let's see if we can. Yeah, it's a little hard to make out, but
no, you can see it.
Yeah, so that's 1/10 of an inch. Plus, then you add whatever's on the dial, and you have wherever you are to 1/100th of an inch. So this will measure up to 6 inches to an accuracy of 1/100th of an inch, and very easily, which is good for someone with poor eyesight, like older people like me.
Yeah.
And this is fairly reliable. You do not have to worry about treating it carefully. You don't have to worry about environmental things. It pretty much does what it says on the can, like I said. And I've actually made things using this caliper and jigs that using ordinary equipment in my garage that had to be 1/100th of an inch in order to meet tolerances for things like forms. And you have to learn some little mechanical tricks, but using jigs, I was able to cut aluminum to an accuracy of 1/100th of an inch using a guide and using this to tell. Now, every time I changed the blade on the jigsaw, I had to do another test cut and then measure where the test cut was to the jig, so I would know how to offset this thing to set the jig up for the cut that I wanted to make. But if those are machinist tricks that when you read about the difference between a skilled machinist and an amateur machinist or someone who's just getting started, it's things like that.
Yeah.
It's knowing the limits of the things and how to like work past them. But this mechanism, these three mechanisms here are a basic thing you see in a lot of more sophisticated instruments as well. You're doing inside, outside, and depth measurement, and it's all with the same mechanism. So it's very economical, and you can pick one of these up for about $20, $30.
Really?
I got this one from Harbor Freight. Now they make bigger ones. I have a 12-inch rule, a 12-inch gauge. It looks just like this, but it's longer. And because it's longer, it has to be heavier per unit inch too, because it has to be more rigid. And it's electronic. Instead of the dial, it's got a little electronic module here.
Yeah.
With a display, which is cool, or at least it was cool until it broke.
I was about to say, I feel like you would want the dial, right? That's in my mind. Yeah, you would.
I'm old school because the dial doesn't need batteries, and I've had two of those electronic ones. They're about $50 because they're physically larger. You know, they're 12-inch gauges instead of 6-inch. But the one that I bought for myself, I can still like clamp this around something and lock it in place and use it as a reference guide and stuff. But it doesn't accurately measure length anymore because the module stopped working. And
it was like the NORAD hard drive vault.
Yeah.
I realized one day it wasn't opening. It's because it's an electronic lock, and I was like, well, we have come to quite the crossroads here because I've got this thing that cannot be broken into, and I was like, fuck. So
I had that exact problem. I bought my wife a little house safe so that she wouldn't have to go up into the attic to
store shit
and all. And I told her there's a brass key that's the override. Don't lose it.
Yeah.
Because if something happened, and eventually the electronic mechanism just stopped working at all. Now that's what I get for buying cheap shit from Harbor Freight. But but it's a danger with even if the good stuff. If you leave the battery in it long enough, then it's going to die.
Yeah. Well, it has like a thing on the side. You can basically like touch it with a battery, like one of those 12 volts. I had something there you can touch it basically, and it'll turn back on. Because I was like, this is a tricky scenario. How do you change the batteries? If you leave them, if you let them die, then it was like the Ford Escape that I was almost getting. The hatchback release is electronic. The switch in the back of the car isn't mechanical; it's a button. And I had this thing. The GPS guy ran a screw through the main cable and destroyed the car. But for several months, I had this thing where the battery would die every couple of weeks because the computer would stay on and drain it. And I couldn't I would have to put it on a fucking battery charger in order to get in the back of the car so I could take my shit out of it before I sent it to the dealership again. So that is a nasty little situation. And a lot of cars nowadays, the only door that has a donkey key socket for the mechanical key is the driver's side door. It's my car, and my fucking electronic thing broke a month ago. So like a fucking peasant, I have to go unlock it. I have to go unlock it with an actual metal key, like some peasant. I should be riding around on a horse, bringing freshly squeezed milk to the upper class. I am dirt.
So 20th century, man.
I am dirt. A side tangent on the note of this thing locking up, which I figured out pretty easily how to change. I picked up some more hard drives. Black Friday. So tempted. I told myself I wasn't going to. The ones in here are fine. These ones are wrapped in like EMP bags, but just desktop. Just some big old fucking 10 terabyte, 16 terabyte. I may or may not have picked up some on Black Friday for like 75% off on Amazon. I got a 10 terabyte, and then I picked up a 16 terabyte, and then I may or may not have picked up two 12 terabytes. So, because I wanted 5 total, so that now these ones on the desktop, they will now be my Pentagon, and I can have A-ring through E-ring, just like the Pentagon. So I have A-ring, I have Pentagon, A-ring, like a sane person, right? Now I can have a Pentagon on my desk. It's gonna look like a pentagram calling in. But yeah, we're getting way off. But yeah,
So anyway,
for that gauge. So my first thought was like that was a way. I figured it was like some sort of like that dial on the top. I thought you could spin that, and then like that's how you could measure a hundredth of an inch.
This knurled knob here is what you use to like slowly move it back and forth, so you have control over it.
Okay.
And there is a rack and pinion built into this thing, just like the one that steers your car.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the dial go around.
Like a peasant.
So there's a linear gear, and we will calibrate these for you too. Yeah. Although, just like with everything else, calibrating means basically, well, it ain't right.
Well, yeah, ain't working. What do I do with it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
There is a zero adjust. It can get off there, and this knob here on the dial is what sets the 0 point for it, because it can get a little sloppy. But the thing about it is this is metal to metal, so for the most part, you don't have to worry too much about these things flexing, as long as you don't, abuse it. Then you'll get fairly consistent results with this thing. If you measure the same thing 4 times, you'll get the same reading. Hot days, cold days, dirt on it, whatever. And 1/100th of an inch allows you to do some pretty slick things in the home shop. I was doing papercrete molds that were accurate enough that only the water would come out when I compressed them.
Jeez.
And the paper would stay inside. So it's it's the next level if you need a more accurate measurement. But I'm just getting started.
Yeah, I was about to say, can you get into thousandths?
Yes. Now, if you want to get into thousandths, you read
my mind. You read my mind, Roger.
This is a set of micrometer calipers. And you'll notice each of them has a travel of 1 inch. So there's a set of 3 of them going from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, and from 2 to 3 inches. And these are only used for outside measurement, but they use a screw. These have a 20 pitch screw. And
what is that, 20 pitch?
20 turns per inch. Okay. These are English units. So this is an inch caliper.
Turns per inch.
And
pinch.
And so you basically, first of all, you pick the right one for the thing you want to measure. That one's too big. So you put the lens you just broke in here, and you tighten the screw on it, and the combination of how many turns you've gone and how far you are around the last turn gives you your distance here to a 1,000th of an inch. Now, this is a screw. Screws compress things.
I was about to say, so does the actual measurement...
So what do you do about the fact that I can get another quarter turn out of this thing by squishing it? That's what this is for. This is a friction clutch. And it's there to make sure you always put the same amount of torque on the screw so that you're always pressing the same amount before you stop so that you get consistent readings.
I was going to say, like, whenever I get super serious about dieting in college, trying to get, like, 10 abs, sometimes when I was really hungry and I'd measure out a bowl of cereal, I would just take my knuckles and I would crunch it all, and then I'd put in, like, another cup, and it was just me jacked up on Adderall. Like, I can't have enough calories, but I was just put 1,000 calories.
And that is an issue when you start getting into finer measurements, is that you start, your measuring device may distort the thing that you're measuring. Now, and also, these are fairly old, and they are made by a very advanced high-precision instrumentation company you may have heard of. Let's see if we can get it here.
Bring it close. Sears. Hey!
Now, these are old, and so they are only rated for 1,000th of an inch. They are rated for 1,000th of an inch. The newer ones, you can go on Amazon, and get a set just like this. 3 gauges, 0 to 3 inches. Plus, they'll have a couple of little bars to calibrate the ones that don't close all the way for about $65. But nowadays, they're advertising a 10,000th of an inch. In addition to this gauge, in addition to the gauge here, they have an additional vernier gauge, like I was talking about with the Vernier calipers, only they apply that to the rotation to get another digit. Now, that makes this problem
a lot
way worse.
One order of magnitude. Is it order of magnitude or is it exponential for the friction?
It's probably linear, so it'd be an order of magnitude. So how do you fix that? There's also the problem of how flat these faces are.
Yeah.
That's an issue.
Yeah.
So you have some of these that don't have flat faces like this. They go to a point. But the problem is that makes the problem of compressing the thing you're measuring with the screw even worse.
What was pressure? Force divided by area? So it's So
you put a hole in the thing you're trying to measure because you're tightening a screw on it. That's what screws do.
How many women do you think have measured their waists over the centuries and like broken a rib? Just been like, I am beautiful.
Well, there was the whole corsetry fad.
I was about to say, what was it, Titanic, in the movie Titanic?
Yeah. Whale bones. And all that stuff.
All that healthy self-image. But it has to be flat.
Now, they make versions of these things that work on similar principles that have electrical contacts. If you're measuring something that conducts electricity, you can stop the screw when the circuit is completed. That way you're not putting a bunch of force on the thing that you're measuring. But the problem with that is you can only use that on things that conduct electricity. So, if I wanted to measure the thickness of a piece of plastic with this, the friction clutch would probably over tighten it. It would compress the plastic because plastic's more compressible than metal, and I would get an error. Yeah. And there's a whole, the air starts to get thin.
Yeah,
when you're looking at accuracy,
it starts to get a little hairy. But I was going to say, I feel like with things that were electrically conductive, I feel like that's all you'd be using.
That is actually considered one of the most accurate ways to get a place. They make a machine called a super mic. We have one at the shop.
Okay.
That's like this big. It's got a instead of this armature, it's got a great big a steel bar about this big with a pinion on it, with a rack and a screw pinion. It's really complicated, but it can be used with the electrical conductivity method, and it can measure longer things. But the problem is that we don't have very good temperature control in our shop, and it's like
that starts to matter.
It starts to matter because you're measuring something that's a foot long, that's made of metal, and you're measuring it to a 10,000th of an inch, then it's not the same length at 77 degrees that it is at 68.
Fuck.
And it's measurably not the same length.
Fuck. Well,
and the whole machine has the same problem.
Fuck.
So
wait, can the machine expand?
Yeah.
Fuck.
The machine itself expands and contracts because it's all based on this big steel bar.
Oh no.
And a 4-foot long steel bar is not the same length when you're measuring a 10,000th of an inch. A 10-degree Fahrenheit change in the temperature changes that sucker very noticeably.
This is like the gods smashing us down from the Tower of Babel. The gods are like, you are getting too close to the source code.
Oh, I haven't gotten to the best stuff yet.
I know, because we are humans and we are arrogant.
But the thing is, when you start looking at stuff like this, you eventually realize the whole world is made of rubber. Actually, in solid matter, the atoms are held together by electric fields linking the atoms, and those electric fields are elastic.
Yeah,
they change length when they're put under pressure. They change length when they are the temperature changes. It's nuts, and the instrument itself is made of matter. So the only way you get around that is if you use something like a laser interferometer.
Laser,
uses light.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you're using a physical gauge or a physical measuring device to measure matter, both the thing you're measuring and the thing you're measuring it with start to act like they're made of rubber when you start getting down to 10,000ths and worse of an inch.
Do you think that's where this is like a dumbed down lesson on like the observer effect, right? Particle and wave.
Well, it was already known when the all of this stuff was well known in the 19th century, and I think that it probably did have an influence on the guys in Copenhagen when they were doing quantum mechanics, because the idea that the act of observing something, the act of measuring it, changes the thing that you're measuring, because you have to apply some kind of force to it. Was already a physical problem in the lab, and saying that this is a fundamental problem with the universe as a whole isn't that much of a stretch from dealing with all these problems that occur just when you're trying to make, how about two metal surfaces that slide against one another and make a gas-tight seal, like in an engine. And we were having to do that in the 19th century in order to make even steam engines. Otherwise, you're losing power and it's leaking all over the place. In fact, early steam engines were low power and leaked all over the place because they had poor seals. That was one of the first problems that they started to solve in the early 19th century, was how to seal the piston up with piston rings and stuff like that.
Wait, they don't use
not lose gas.
I thought they used like rubber or like a fluid. That's metal on metal?
Yeah, well, they lubricate it with oil, but yeah. It's rubber and all wouldn't last too long in an internal combustion engine.
Damn,
whenever I have you against metal, and the tolerances are like worse than a 10,000th of an inch.
Whenever I have you on, Roger, my view of the universe always gets you always take the rug out from under it. I come away dumber but smarter after talking to you.
Well, it's one of those things. I mean, there's actually a lot of people who are in amateur land who do know a lot about things like that, because there's a lot of people who work on their engines. They know the physical principles involved. There are techniques that are not particularly high tech that you can use to make metal things fit together very closely without necessarily making them accurate. You're just making them accurate with respect to one another. And this is one of the things about early firearms. You've heard, I know, that early guns didn't have interchangeable parts.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that the gunsmith was a skilled guy who would take every gun and form the parts by honing them against one another with patterns of motion that they knew would grind them into compatible shapes so that they would move properly against one another. And learning those motions and the abrasives to use and the steps of abrasive, because you start with coarse abrasives and then you move to finer ones until you're doing a polish, and getting those parts to fit together correctly was an art. I mean, it was something that you would learn as an apprentice, and in a lot of cases there were secrets that would be maintained by the guilds and all. But the thing is, you might make 3 guns, and you might get all of them to function by getting all of their parts honed and shaped so that they would move properly and make the mechanical action. But if you take a part from this one and put it on that one, they're not going to fit.
No bueno.
So this was the soul of the American method of manufacture, was instead of forming things against each other like that. Well, it's like if you make a home telescope. If you make a telescope by grinding your own telescope mirror, that is a very low-tech thing, really. You can do it in your backyard, and you're just messing one piece of glass against another, and there's certain motions that you make and pressures that you do, and then you do tests. Nowadays, you can get a laser. But back in the day, you would put chemicals in an alcohol flame in order to get monochromatic light to do an interference test. And you'd see, okay, this part's a little high, this part's a little low, so we're going to grind it a little different. And you could get a good parabolic curve, but you didn't have a lot of control over the exact focal length you were going to get. So you might get, if you made 2 telescopes using the exact same technique, they might both function perfectly, but one might have a an inch longer focal length than the other. And if you tried to use them to make a binocular, it's all going to be out of whack. So in industry, you can't do that. In the early steam engines, they did that. That was how they made pistons fit tightly in cylinders, was they were individually honed. The problem with that is that when it breaks, which or if it's a gun, gets knocked about in a war because people are shooting at you and subjecting it to all kinds of stress, you can't just pop in another part and go shoot at stuff.
Yeah.
You have to take it back to a gunsmith who can make a new pair of parts, a new set that fits together correctly. So the whole point of the American method of manufacture was that instead of making these things to each other using these artisan techniques, you were making them to standards. And they came up with what they called no-go gauges, which in the original days, those gauges were handmade by artisans in the plant machine shop. But what they were making was a gauge that you would use to see whether the part you had just made was the right size or not. So if it fit in this and it didn't go any further, then you would know it's in tolerance, and you can use that part in the next step. And there was a lot of variations on how stuff was done to make all of this practical, and to use it in more and more complex situations so that you could make more and more complicated machines. But a lot of the difference, cars go a lot further today with a lot less maintenance than they did in the 50s.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is tighter tolerances. Everything is machined to tighter tolerances nowadays because all of those arts have advanced, and a cylinder that fits more closely will pass less oil. It'll hold the gases better. It just generally performs better. It doesn't wobble as much going up and down. And you would think, how much does a piston wobble? Oh, they can measure all this shit.
Yeah, yeah. And then you just add it up over millions of cycles.
Yeah, and so in the 50s, you had to change your oil every 3,000 miles, and once your engine had 100,000 miles on it, it was shot. Nowadays, you change your oil every 10,000 miles, and you drive 200,000 miles with the hood welded shut. No, it's like, you just don't worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's because of these tolerances being met in manufacturing. And that brings me...
Well, I pause that. I was going to say, but that makes me think, because I was thinking about SR-71 pilots. Like, is it Brian Scholl? I need to get that guy on this podcast. But that guy wrote
Jet engines are like nothing else as far as precision. They have stupid, scary precision. And they have to deal with massive temperature changes.
Yeah.
So they have to make bearings and shit that maintain their precision when all of these parts, which are sometimes made of dissimilar metals that don't have the same coefficient of expansion, they have to model the whole thing to make sure that it will all perform in spec when it's cold, when it's hot, when a bird hits it. It's just, it's nuts. Because the stresses on a jet engine are like,
yeah,
almost up there with the strength of materials that's theoretically possible for solid matter. And a tolerance problem that another place where you see it, and probably to about the same degree, is the difference between Formula One and race cars and your car in your garage.
Okay.
They regularly look for hundredth thousandth of an inch tolerances. They will generally try to make all of the parts in that engine 10 times more accurate than the ones in your car, because they're pushing all the envelopes with the performance. And in a lot of cases, by the time they run a race with that engine, it's been destroyed as far as the tolerances they were aiming for, because things don't keep those tolerances when you subject them to all those forces and pressures and temperatures and stuff. So this is one of the big things, is that they in NASCAR and F1 and all these disciplines, they rebuild the engines like after every race, and they'll have 4 engines because one of them will throw a rod anyway.
Yeah.
And the tolerances in jet engines are very similar to that. And again, this is why you you figure you drive your car for $5,000, you've barely worn the engine. You drive a jet engine for $5,000, it's time for an overhaul.
Yeah. Well,
And
I was gonna say, yeah, Air Force One, they change out everything. Well, not everything, but they change out. Like I watched a documentary on Air Force One. It was fucking great. But they talked about, they're like, the stuff that you change every like 2 months on a normal plane gets changed every time this thing lands. New tires, straight up new tires. It lands, new tires.
You ever landed in a plane with a flat tire? I have.
No.
It's not fun.
No, Roger, I'm not.
And those,
no, not intentional.
and those tires are. Those, that's another thing. I mean, that's not. I'm talking more about measurement precision today, but yeah, things like that where you're talking.
You film with nitrogen instead.
Yeah, well, and also, they go from not turning to going 300 miles an hour in a fraction of a second when they hit the ground.
Yeah,
and they're made of rubber.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, the SR-71, not a mass-produced thing. They made, like 20 of them? And I was thinking, because that's not a mass-produced thing, so was it interchangeable parts? And in Skunk Works by...
a lot of the SR-71 parts were done by artisan style. Well, especially like the body panels and stuff like that.
That's what I was getting at. Ben Rich talked about that. And not only that, it was with titanium, so they were using a lot of instruments that they had never used before. And with that...
Yeah. A lot of the forming methods for titanium, things that work on normal metal don't work on titanium.
Well, and that's they had to make all this up as they went. But I was going to say that pilot, Brian Schul, he talks about, he said you had to have your SR-71 because if you flew your buddies, he was like,
different experience.
He said they were all women and they all had wildly different personalities. But really, he was like, you'd be pushing this thing, and sometimes you'd be up there, and you could tell she was just giving you a bad day, and he'd be like, hey, we're keeping this thing at Mach 2.5. There'd be other days where they'd be like, she'd just purr, and you would just touch it forward, and it would be like, how fast do you want to go? But I was like, that probably comes from...
because also all the parts move with respect to one another, and the body and everything, so it's like... But yeah, when you go to things like that, race cars are also pretty much artisan things. Now, they'll do a race car engine. They'll do it to standards. I'm about to show you something that's really going to blow your mind.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, they'll do that to standards. But in a lot of ways, the construction of a race car is more like artisan stuff, where you're pushing what standards methodology can do and going more into artisan stuff to get stuff fitting together even better than you can get.
Right, it's like the standards is like the front of the plane, and like artisan is like the shock wave in front of it. It's just like
kind of like that, yeah.
Roger, I'm gonna go piss because it's at the 1 hour point, and I'm a creature of habit. Okay. Roger Williams, author of Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. Roger, monologue.
Yes, get my book, The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect, from any bookseller online, including Amazon. But if you get a paper copy instead of an ebook, please consider going to lulu.com and getting it from them, because they have to charge you the same price, but they give me a lot more of the money. Got a lot of other stuff listed at localroger.com, or if you just look for Roger Williams and Prime Intellect on the usual search services on Amazon and them. And we're thinking about getting it on Audible. That's another matter.
I am going to make an effort to stop fucking interrupting you. I interrupt a lot.
That's fine. That's fine. Actually, you asked very good questions, and a lot of the stuff that I'm bringing is stuff that a lot of people have never seen, don't even know exists, and much of our civilization wouldn't exist without it.
Yeah.
And that brings me to something really cool. Feel the urge to sing "Thus Spake Zarathustra." This is a gauge block.
I feel like now you're just lying to me because that just looks like a block.
It does, doesn't it? It's a steel block, okay? It has a friend, okay? This one is 4 inches long, and this one is 3 inches long. And by that, I mean exactly 4 inches and 3 inches to within about 100,000th of an inch.
Fuck.
These are standards. Now, the reason that I have them here to play with is that both of these have been ruined.
Okay.
They are dead. And the way that they got ruined was one of our technicians took the set out of the shop and left it in his pickup truck for 2 weeks.
Bastard.
In southern Louisiana.
Okay.
Where it was hot and humid. And they rusted. I'll see if I can show you.
On the edge.
You see the discoloration there on the end?
Yep.
Okay, that's the pitting from where it rusted. And at first we thought the entire kit had been ruined. This is a kit. These are from a kit of, and just went straight on my head how many blocks are on this damn thing. I think it's 64 blocks. But anyway, it's a whole set of these blocks that are meant to be assembled to make standards of any arbitrary length from 1/10 of an inch to several feet in intervals of 1/10,000th of an inch. And about a third of them were ruined. We sent these off to the lab to recertify them, and both of these blocks came back. Can't do it. Lost too much crap off the end. Can't rehome them. So before they were fucked up, each of these these blocks are also, they're not just gauge. You can get a set of gauge blocks to use like in your shop manufacturing plant for mid-hundreds of dollars.
Like I could use those, right? I could use those, right? They're still 4 and 3 inches. Like,
yeah, well, you can use them for rough crap, but not what they were designed for. Which I'm getting to. Okay. So each of these blocks before it was destroyed was worth between $100 and $150.
Okay.
The set that they came out of cost $6,000. Now, the ends of these things. Now, each of these still has one good end. Fortunately, See, that one is shiny. Okay. Now, the good ends. These things are very, very flat. They are flat to within 6 millionths of an inch. They are so flat that there is a stupid gauge block trip, which I will try to demonstrate for you. I'm not a gauge block guy, though, so we'll see if I can get this right. Almost. I'm trying to do this without dropping one of them on my computer.
I think I can.
What I'm trying to do here, there we go, is ring them together. They are so flat, they will stick.
How's that? So what? Just gets rid of all the air or creates suction or?
Funny you should ask that. Now, these don't stick very well because they've been messed up. So they make this cute little helper thing that once you ring them together, you can put this in place to hold them a little more strongly. And voila, 7-inch fucked up gauge block. How the ringing force works.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. Nobody knows. Why do these things stick together? It's not magnetism because you can ring blocks that are not made of steel. These are made of steel, but they make them out of ceramic materials. They make them out of silicon carbide. It's not air pressure because you can ring them in a vacuum. It does help to have a film between the two blocks, but you can ring blocks that are perfectly dry and get them to stick together. So it's suspected that it is an electronic type force of some kind.
I was going to say, are you aware of hyperconjugation in organic chemistry? Hyperconjugation, it's like when every other main force has basically been like, that's no longer an issue. Like the only thing is like, it's like when it's kind of what you're saying, when everything else is measured, the only thing left to do is measure like friction. In hyperconjugation, if I remember, in like benzene rings, it's like when all the other like primary kind of movers and shakers of OChem are get rid of, It's like with billionaires. When Elon Musk and Bill Gates pit at each other, eventually it comes down to pennies. It's like the very slight force of like if you put a benzene ring on like a planar scale, the up and down.
The thing is, we also know they're fairly consistent about the distance between these. And something I'm going to try to demonstrate here too is the ringing force is only in length. You can slide them and they stay rung. So it's not like an adhesive, which, because they're stuck together, you wouldn't be able to slide them back and forth. You can slide these back and forth, and they still stick to one another. These are not cooperating because I think the ends were damaged a little. Gage blocks that haven't been damaged can really support some stupidly high forces that way.
Could that be used for construction in orbit? Roger? Did we lose Roger?
Not really, because 7-inch.
Roger's glitching in and out of reality. Roger, can you hear or see me?
My internet connection is
I can. Mine's fine.
Yeah, I have you. I got a little message that said my internet is unstable.
Yeah, it'll do that
from Zoom.
Internet sucks.
Okay, now you're digging a little bit.
No, I am. Says your image is gone. Can you hear me?
Haven't really had that much trouble. Maybe it's because it's Monday evening.
Maybe. No, because are you back? There you are. There you are. Can you see me?
Yeah, it must have been a temporary bandwidth suck because you just came back. It's like you faded out for a little, and then back to
Ragucci.
Yeah.
All right. So sorry. So you're saying lengthwise?
In order for something to a surface to be flat enough to ring and stable enough to ring, it's generally very massive. So it's not the sort of thing you would use in space.
Okay.
But because of the ringing, you can take these blocks in this kit, and if you decide you want a standard that is 6.1874 inches long, you can assemble the Gage blocks standard, and then you can take that into your shop and copy it with standard machine shop techniques to make a permanent standard of that size. So this is what makes it possible for a company to decide they want a manufacturing partner that's halfway around the world. And they're going to make pistons for the internal combustion engine you're building in Detroit. And when those pistons arrive, they actually fit because they have a gauge block set. And these things are calibrated. In fact, the reason these gauge blocks were so expensive is these are special gauge blocks. These were not just the gauge blocks you would use in your shop that were good to like maybe 50 micro inches. These are good to like 10 micro inches. These are the gauge blocks that you use to check your other gauge blocks to see if they're any good.
Who watches
At least
the
if you haven't ruined.
I said who watches the Watchmen? Who gauges the gauge blocks?
Well, and it turned there is an issue that there's a practice that we call traceability. And where this all comes from is the NIST, the National Bureau of Standards. They maintain a lab, and we would send this. In fact, after the pickup truck incident, we sent the entire kit up to the next level lab. Tell us which ones can be saved. Tell us which ones need to be replaced, and do what you have to do. And they recertify it. And even if you haven't left it in a pickup truck, then you do that every couple of years anyway, because things that will change the length of these things. Okay, well, temperature. A temperature difference of 2 degrees centigrade will throw these things out of tolerance.
Jesus.
So the NIST gauge block lab is temperature controlled to within 1 degree centigrade, and you cannot do that with an ordinary air conditioning system and thermostat. That you have to have a PID control system like a sous vide cooker for your climate control system.
Yeah,
it's a very expensive and exotic way to do things.
Probably need it like at the CDC or some shit.
Even the CDC doesn't bother with this. This is a specific thing for very high precision, fixed physical parts. When you bring the gauges in, presumably from a place that is not exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a standard temperature that these are calibrated
That's what
for.
I was about to ask. Is there a standard temperature?
It's 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So in the lab, there is an enormous block of metal that they use for equalization. They take all the gauges and they lay them out and they leave them there for several hours so that their temperature can equalize with the temperature of the lab before they slap them on the Gage Block comparator. And there is an additional, I'm going to take these apart before I drop something. With the longer blocks, just handling this like this in the course of moving it around the lab and putting it on the comparator and doing it and ringing it and all, it will absorb enough heat from my hand,
from your hand,
to change its length.
Fuck.
And put it in error. The force of gravity, starting at about the length of this one, this is a 4-inch bar. They warn, if you have a vertically oriented Gage Block comparator, when you sit the block up like this, the force of gravity is strong enough to compress it and take it out of tolerance. So you have to apply a corrective factor.
Jesus.
Now, this is a steel block.
Jesus Christ.
And its own weight will sag enough to throw it out of tolerance.
So is there a limit to, or is this a dimensional thing? Like, so you lay it on its side, it's fine. Is there a limit to how big they can get to where even laying horizontally, the weight will compress? Or is there a way you can offset that? Well,
there are corrective measures that you can take. There is a handbook. There is a handbook the NIST publishes about the care and feeding of your Gage blocks that describes all this stuff. It is 140 pages long.
How to handle your block.
Yes. How to use Gage blocks. Fuck. 140 pages.
Fuck.
And now, one of the reasons they make blocks out of steel like these is that if the thing you're measuring is also made out of steel, it's a win, because whatever errors you have because of things like the temperature
will go accordingly.
Will affect what you're measuring as well, and they'll wash. But
God forbid it's not steel.
They make Gage blocks out of other things. They make them out of ceramic. They make them out of silicon carbide because it's more durable. Because it's very easy to damage these faces. You see how little damage was done here, and that has been considered to completely ruin this. They couldn't even downgrade them to make them like a B-grade Gage block that you would just use on the floor. They were ruined.
Junk.
They are no longer useful as Gage blocks. The main reason that they kept them around is they use them for lapping and a few things that a really flat surface is useful for.
Okay.
But like when I asked if you all had any of the Gage blocks that were ruined so I could do a little show and tell, they were like, oh, yeah, no problem.
Jesus.
Because most people have never seen one of these, have no idea what they're for, and our entire civilization is only possible because these things exist. They are a foundational thing. These were invented in 1896 by a Swede named Carl Edvard Johansson. And they revolutionized manufacturing because they made it possible. Once these things became popular, you didn't have to send a standard to your manufacturing partner anymore to make sure things would line up. All you had to send was drawings and numbers, and they could take their Gage block set, which is ultimately traceable to the same source as your Gage block set.
It's like a...
And their stuff would be the same size.
It's like a weird kind of like encryption almost. Not really.
Or like the opposite of encryption, because it's like everything is public.
Well, fuck me. All right, never mind. This podcast is over. Fuck you, Roger. But yeah, it's that same. We have the same. We're looking at the same thing.
Yeah. Back in the good old days, everything came out of Paris, and these would ultimately all end up compared in some fashion or other to the standard meter that was maintained in Paris. And ever since the 30s or 40s, I forget when they adopted the standard, Actually, it had to be later than that because they use laser light. But we now have a standard definition for the meter that's in wavelengths of laser light. So anybody anywhere in the world can assemble a machine that will allow them to construct an accurate standard length standard. And so these no longer end up getting traced to something that had to be put on a boat and shipped across the Atlantic. Now they go to NIST most likely, who has one of the machines that can do the optical interferometry and make a master standard.
That's what I was going to ask, is what happens if the master gets damaged, but I guess you just answered that question.
Yeah, and that's been a thing of what happens with the master, because these things change. If you do everything right, if you don't put it in a pickup truck, if you don't, if you don't screw around with it, if you don't actually use it and damage the ends, if you put it in a sealed box and exclude air so that it can't corrode, and you put it in a nice, safe place in a refrigerator, in a few years it'll still change length. So the steel, the crystals in the steel lattice, the steel in the steel, whatever they call it, matrix, move around.
So so how the fuck do we even? Yeah. So I feel like if we lose the prime, right? Because I remember reading that in physics. I remember that was like the first page of the first chapter. I remember that blew my mind, because they're like, how long is a meter? And I'm not a kid, mind you. I was like 22 in this class, and it was like, a meter is like, actually, there's like a piece of metal in this lab. And I was like, oh, fuck, there's an actual meter. And then, of course, my mindset was like, there's going to be some terrorist that's like, I'm going to do the most damage to the world ever. Fuck the Twin Towers. I'm going to go blow up that meter.
If someone had blown up the standard meter back when we were still depending on it, there were several close copies kept by other major powers. The one treaty that every country in the world has signed off on, no matter how much they hate one another, no matter how different they are, is the Standards Treaty that defines how all these standards are maintained to traceability. Everybody, there's like 168 signatories. Every country in the world has agreed that these things have to be maintained, because otherwise you can't do international commerce.
Well, even like Israel and fucking like Iran need to do that, because guys, if we want to continue killing each other and blowing each other's kids up, like, we need to have some standards for our artillery shells.
Yeah, because we need to make sure that our bullets fit in your guns when we capture them.
And vice versa. And they're all just nodding their heads. They're like, agreed. How are we going to kill each other? But yeah.
But it's one of the most universal things, and because everybody has recognized the importance of it, and the thing is, so at the turn of the 20th century, it was almost all still standards in Paris. The length standard and the kilogram were the big ones, but there was a couple of others, and the meter was finally retired. Yeah, and what they do with these is they make those standards of the most stable material they can think of, which is generally pure platinum. You know how much a meter-long block like this, made of platinum,
that is some
costs?
Big dick energy. That is like, that is pimp. That's fuck the challenge to the ring.
But even at that, the question of how they change over time, with subtle effects. Oh, I forgot to mention air pressure. If you take one of these to the top of a mountain where the air pressure is lower, they change length.
Well, that's what I was going to say earlier when I said because I was thinking, like, what if you take them into space, and then you beat me to it and you said 68 degrees, but the next thing I thought was at sea level.
Yeah, and that's an issue.
Sea level for who? For Earth.
Yeah, when you're trying to achieve the level of accuracy these were designed for, then, like I said, everything's made of rubber.
Yeah,
it's like everything affects them, and so the control of the environment where you're using them becomes a much bigger deal than the manufacturing process by which they were made and delivered to you. Because if you don't have the controlled temperature environment, these things aren't worth the metal they're made out of.
Yeah,
you're not getting out of them what you paid for. So, but in these case, like I said, these are grade 0, which is the kit was $6,000. But what you use your grade 0 blocks for is you take them out once in a while and you use the strength. They have a machine called a Gage Block Comparator. I have no idea how it works. But they use it to make sure that your test gauge block is the same length as the good one. And you take the good ones every couple of years and you send them to a lab that is a notch up, closer to the master standard. And the master standard used to be the standard meter in Paris. Now it's some lab that's closer that has the interferometer that can count off the wavelengths of laser light and tell whether it's the right length or not. So, that's how it all flows down to the shop floor, where you are either using a B grade set of these that is not as accurate. They also make them that have more durable. These are made from metrology. The metallurgy has been refined to make them as stable as possible, even though they're made out of steel. But some of them have hardened ends so that you don't damage them as easily when you're ringing them and when you're using them to compare stuff. And then a lot of times what you use those for is to make fixed gauges, like go, no-go gauges that are used on the shop floor for every piece, just to make sure that your quality control is up. And those get brought back into the lab every once in a while, compared against these, and it all flows back uphill to the National Bureau of Standards. And that is the same for for length here, but it's also the same as weight. It's just more obvious with weight that you have to do that, because you can't just eyeball something and tell how much it weighs. We're used to the idea of eyeballing something and tell, hey, you say this thing is off. Fuck, man, it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
like, what's wrong? Actually, my micrometer also reports that it's perfect. The lab that knows what it's doing, not so much. Let's see.
In my mind, these like higher orders of like labs, I imagine that the members start to wear like Illuminati cloaks. And you get to the inner temple.
Yeah. This is an ordinary metal shape from the hardware store that I used to make something that I then took apart because it didn't work. So according to this, it's perfect. It's exactly 1/4 inch thick.
Yeah.
According to this, it's 0.004 of an inch too thick.
Okay. So it gets...
And...
Now, is it actually a 0.004, or can you get something that goes? Is that where you're getting to?
Well, what I'm getting to is that you use these to calibrate. They make other measuring devices that are just as obviously you have to have something that can tell whether this thing is the right length or not. Generally, by comparing it to another gauge block, but you also have more general purpose machines like the Super Mic, which you would use to measure things like this. And yeah, you can get them up to 10,000th of an inch, 100,000th in a special circumstances, because there you're talking about all the temperature control and all the environmental factors and shit. And at that level, this is just like, this might as well be a 2x4.
Yeah.
It's we used to thinking of things. Some of the stuff you get at the hardware store is really surprisingly accurate. If you buy a drill bit and drill a hole with it, with a drill press so that it's not wobbling and everything, that hole will generally be within 1,000th of an inch. Mm-hmm. They're super accurate. Now getting it where you want it, that's a different story.
Yeah, that's on you.
But one of the things you can do to register stuff is you stack two pieces of metal on top of one another and drill a hole through them. Well, then you can put a pin in that hole, and you can relocate them within 1,000th of an inch repeatedly to do other operations on them that depend on. That's one of the kinds of things that those artisans were doing when they were hand making firearms and stuff like that, is little tricks like that, where you have some operations that are inherently very accurate, like drilling a hole. Drilling a hole has been pretty damn accurate since the beginning of the 19th century, maybe even a little earlier if you had the specialty stuff. But the fact that you can drill a hole and put a pin in it and have that little slop is something you can use, because you can use that to do other operations that make sure things are the same shape.
Nothing is real. I don't know what to...
That when we started getting into this stuff, then yeah, that was like the first thing. And And honestly, we still don't have the air conditioning system that we really should have. We don't have the temperature control to make some of this stuff work. So
I remember seeing one thing that said like they figured out the measurement. This might have been what you were saying, but in that physics book, it was like the measurement of a meter. They were like, yeah, now it's the distance that light travels, like every 1,667 rotations of a fluoride atom. And I was like, who the fuck was like, hold on, I got an idea.
It's actually a number of wavelengths of the laser light for the meter. Time is super accurately measured now because they're using atomic clocks, and they're literally measuring the number of times an individual atom vibrates.
God, but even with like the standard blocks and shit, how do we not know that? Because right, if we know the universe is expanding, is everything expanding? But it's expanding are we expanding relative to, like, are the very things we're using to measure the things that we use to measure, are those changing?
They could be. All we know is that these things stay consistent with respect to one another. If we follow the rules and we're careful, then these things fit together. So we can make two gauge blocks on opposite sides in the world, starting with an optical interferometer that tells us, yep, this is intolerance. And when we meet up in St. Louis and compare them, then they'll be the same length to within our tolerances of 100,000. Basically one part in several 100,000. Is what they aim for. Now, this kit has several 6-inch blocks, so we can use these little helper doodads to assemble a bar that's that long. Now, once you do that, you've got several ring films that are adding to the length a little bit, about a micro-inch each. It's not going to be as accurate, but again, it's like, what are you aiming for? The convenience of these kits is that you can basically make a tool of any arbitrary length to whatever number of 10,000ths of an inch you want.
Yeah.
Pretty closely.
Well,
and it will fit. Now, but again, it's not going to be exact. You're going to be within, maybe a few 100,000ths of an inch if you want, but you can get a better fit than that if you use those old techniques and hone things against one another to shape them to where they fit together, and not worry about the exact measurement as much as whether they've been formed to match
one another. Well, that's what I was going to say, is it seems like if the universe is expanding and maybe like the fucking coefficient of like Hawking decay is changing, how would we know? And as you said, it wouldn't matter because they all work within relative to each other. But isn't that a funny full circle? In a way, it doesn't matter because these are our artisan pieces. Yeah. These are our artisan pieces.
Well, and there are several competing things too, which we know work in different ways that agree with one another. So that's a good thing because we know that if we make these things, they're consistent to a certain extent, but also the mechanism by which laser light is made has nothing whatsoever to do with any of this matter shit.
Okay.
That is entirely a quantum electromagnetic phenomenon that's based on completely different physical principles. And the laser light method of measuring the blocks agrees with measuring the blocks against one another. The other thing that is striking is the mechanisms by which atomic spectra emerge. You get this array of colors that each atom makes when it's excited or that absorbs when shining through it. Those depend very sensitively on certain physical constants, what they call the magic numbers, things like Planck's constant. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of constants that describe how easy it is to make an electric and a magnetic field. Yeah. And if those numbers were different, even slightly, then those atomic spectra would look completely different. And what we know, this is how we know, when we look at the light from a quasar 10 billion light years away, that space has the same properties that it does here, because those atomic spectra would look completely different if any of those constants were even slightly different. Yeah. So that gives us a pretty good idea that some of those physical constants are very stable and have been the same for a very long time. Now, they do suspect that, like in the early moments of the Big Bang, that space itself may not have existed in the form that we think of it today, and so things may have been evolved. But eventually, everything kind of froze out.
Yeah.
And since those early days, the universe has been extremely consistent. But then there is, why is it expanding? Why are all the galaxies flying apart from one another? And that is still a question that is not solidly answered. You ask 10 physicists what they think dark energy is, which is the catch-all name for whatever is making the universe fly apart, and you will get 10 different answers. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll get more agreement on dark matter, and that's, nobody knows what it is. But as far as as if the whole universe was expanding to that, well, it would have to be doing it in a very precise way. Otherwise, a lot of stuff that works wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So that's where you get into some of the stuff that is really they recently did for mass, like last year, what they did for length back in the 50s or 60s, I guess it was, and came up with a standard that wasn't a block of metal in Paris. And I read the paper on what they did, and I have no fucking clue how it works.
Okay.
I mean, I cannot begin to tell you what they did. But they've somehow built an apparatus that can tell you how much your thing weighs, or how massive it is, based on some way that it affects fundamental constants of the universe. And it's a thing that you can duplicate without having to go back to Paris and measure the damn standard kilogram. So it's like, that was the last one.
Do you think maybe whoever made it up was just so smart that they knew no one was going to question them? So they're like, trust me, this is it. And everyone's like, fuck, I guess I'm too dumb to know.
Well, I'm not in a position to say.
Yeah.
I do know a lot of smart people who are going, yay! I had read an article before they did it about some of the methods they were trying. I know one of the things they were pursuing was extremely perfect silicon spheres, because they could make an extremely pure silicon crystal, and they could make an extremely accurate sphere and measure its diameter very accurately. Of course, temperature and all that shit, because Gage blocks, right? But using that, they could relate the number of atoms in that sphere to its weight when you weighed it. And that could have been a basis of a standard of mass that you could duplicate without having to go back to the original platinum block. Whatever they did is much more subtle than that, and I didn't understand it at all. In fact, one of these days I need to ask my dad if he has any idea what they did. But the main point is that we did get away from being dependent on that block of metal, and that was a big deal, because yes, it was a big worry in a lot of circles how stable that block of metal is. I mean, there's a lot of research, and in fact, they're keeping the standard kilogram, because now that they don't need it as the standard anymore, they want to study it and see how it changes over time. Now that they don't need it now that they're not using it as the standard anymore, they can actually study it to see how stable it actually is. And it's like, oh man, this is it gets weird.
Now what is the actual? What is the practical? And I know I'll probably have the answer shit on my face, because I would imagine as technology gets more and more advanced, we need these tolerances. But like, what is the purpose of getting within, like, man, earlier when you said that the edge of that block was within 6 millionths of an inch, I was going to make a 2-in-1 joke about how it must have been designed by Nazis. 6 million, but then also because Nazis were so precise. But hey,
a lot of the early work in metrology was done by the Germans.
You got to take the wins where you can take them, I guess. But
yeah, although it was a Swede who invented gauge blocks.
Yeah.
And in fact, an interesting little thing that I ran across was when he applied for a patent. Johansson couldn't get it at first because the government didn't understand what he had done, and he had to appeal his rejection And
Hey
in order
morons. Right? It's hey morons.
So the patent office didn't understand what he had invented, and this is like it is not really an exaggeration to say that these are one of the most important inventions in man's entire history.
Yeah.
Because they have made a lot of modern technology possible. Without these, we would still be depending on physical transport of standards and artisans of high skill to make them. So you would have a staffing problem. You would not have a lot of economies of scale and efficiencies. These make it possible to quickly do things that would have been nearly impossible without them. Like I said, you have an engineer makes a drawing, and there's a thing that's got to be accurate to a 10,000th of an inch, and it's got to be some arbitrary weird number. And you just go to the Gage Block set, and it's like Legos. You just put it together, boom, okay. Give it to the machinist, make us a permanent standard this length. Yeah. And he does his thing. You put the Gage blocks back in their box, put that back in the safe, and now you've got a tool that you can use on the shop floor to make the stuff the shape that you need it and all. And none of that was possible before these things were invented. They went around the world in the first decades of the 20th century. They went from no one knew what the fuck they were to everybody had them. And an interesting thing, you may know that, or a lot of people don't know this, but the inch is officially defined as 25.4 millimeters. Exactly. The inch is defined in terms of millimeters. Okay, without a bunch of decimal points out in the far end. It's just the reason for that is the biggest company that was making gauge blocks. Originally, all the gauge blocks were metric because they started in Europe. Well, this company decided, because they wanted to market to Britain and the USA, to start making English imperial unit gauge blocks in inches. But the US and Britain had different standards for the inch. One of them was a little more than 25.4 millimeters, and one of them was a little less. And the difference was way out in the fifth decimal point. So this guy who ran this company said, fuck it, threw his hands in the air and said, we're just going to make it 25.4 millimeters. And all the other gauge block makers in the world decided to adopt the same standard so that their products would be compatible. And then in the early 30s, first Britain and then the United States relented and adopted the same standard themselves, because that's what everyone was using. Because ultimately you had to use gauge blocks to standardize things, and the gauge blocks were being made to that standard, and saying that your standard was off in the fifth decimal place because national pride or whatever wasn't going to fly.
What the fuck? So it's
so private industry for the win.
Woo! Right? It's like it gets to that point where you're just like, fuck it, this is what we're doing. It's like when you look at the border between Canada and the US, it's like they start on like the west and they're like, and they're just like, fuck it, just straight line. That's what it is. Everyone shut up.
40th parallel, whatever it is.
It's 25.44, so help me God, I'll pull this car over. Like everyone's just like, all right, fine, all right, it's 25.44. All right, man.
But the thing is that having these standards is what makes it possible for think about all the shit that went into a Saturn V.
Yeah.
For the Apollo program, all the different places that all that stuff was made, and they fitted it all together, and for the most part it worked the first time. So you don't do that now in aerospace. They're using the grade 0 blocks. They're doing it real careful. Okay, it's not like, but actually Johansson's company was in trouble because of I think depression came along, and he was saved by Ford Motor Company. They bought it out and invested in it in order to keep that business afloat when it was having financial troubles. So this is something that some of the early manufacturers recognized the importance of it. Mm-hmm. And like I keep saying, the modern world would look very different if these things didn't exist. The reason that this fiberglass ruler is so accurate is that a whole bunch of machines were calibrated so that when they put the ink and the copy, the etch resist and all the stuff on this, it's very accurate.
It was made,
and this all, and in a very real sense, this all goes back to gauge blocks.
Fuck.
That's how they keep things synchronized all over the world, so that when we make, like I said, you make a piston in Korea and put it in an engine block that was made in Detroit, it fits.
So now what is the need for these taller, like if we get past like 100,000th of an inch, like what is that? Is that laser technology? Is that future computer chips?
Well, when you get past micro inches, you're really in a realm where solid matter no longer is capable of maintaining them anyway.
Yeah.
So there you really are in a realm where atomic forces are starting to
become more powerful,
intrude on things.
Yeah.
Well, it's like microprocessors. We talked about how they're getting the features to be so small that they're acting more like a line of atoms than a wire.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems they're running up against. So when you start looking for physical tolerances better than 1 part in a few 100,000, it's very hard to find any kind of solid matter at all that can maintain those tolerances in a realistic situation. It's going to stretch like taffy as far as the temperature and the pressure and the forces are going to squish it and stretch it, and it's just, so it becomes impossible. So really, these things have the tolerances they do because they are at the limits of what you can do with physical matter. The next best thing to a gauge block is an optical interferometer. But really what we use the optical interferometer for is to calibrate gauge blocks, because it's much more practical to use a gauge block in a practical situation, like, in a plant, to make sure the parts you're making are the right size, to make sure the machines are calibrated. It's much easier to use gauges made of matter than it is to try and use optical techniques. And even those have a limit, because the wavelength of light is about, in the 500 nanometer range, depending on whether it's drifting toward blue or red. Well, that's half a micrometer. So that, the wavelength of light is about where you are when you're talking about the accuracy of these blocks. Now, there are techniques that you can use to go beyond that, and they have to use those doing integrated circuits, for example, because they're doing things like 12 nanometer processes and God knows what. So they're using shorter wavelength light and all kinds of diffraction techniques and fancy shit. But you really reach a point where just maintaining the environmental controls to keep solid matter from distorting becomes impossible if you're looking for more precision. And oddly, that happens. Those tolerances still represent a very large multiple of the distance between atoms in a solid. The ringing gap between two gauge blocks that have been rung together is about a microinch. But that's about 100 times greater than the distance between atoms in a solid. That's why no one is really sure how ringing works, because it acts more like an electrical phenomenon than anything else. But if it's electrical, it's not even closely related to the atomic shell forces that hold matter together in normal circumstances. So it's kind of hard to get devices inside that millionth of an inch gap to try and probe what's going on in there.
It's weird because it's like we're getting to this like point where everything's like we're trying to like measure sandcastles, but like the tide is rising, and like the things we're measuring are also made out of sand, and it's like everything's getting wet and goopy, and it's like, does it just turn to like, is that the next paradigm? Like maybe we're moving out of like physical specifications and into like light patterns or something.
Yeah, well, that's the standard now. If you when you get past the point where matter can hold it, then your next step is an optical interferometer, and you're comparing it against the wavelength of electromagnetic radiation, which is constant, at least as far as we know. But like I said, if the whole universe was expanding at a certain rate, well, then all those constants have to be tracking with it, because it seems to be, it's consistent to within a stupid number of significant figures. And the thing about light is that our measurement of time and distance is related, and it's very closely related to the speed of light. And we know the speed of light to within like 12 decimal places. I mean, it's just, we know it stupidly accurately. And that means we can measure time down to just stupidly short intervals, and
femto, pico.
It's like it's all change. We can tell that the length of the day is changing by so many milliseconds, per year, and all that stuff like this.
The moon,
and that's not even at the outside. We measure the distance to the moon within 3 inches.
Yeah, and we know the moon moves at half an inch every year. It moves half an inch farther away. Shit.
because of tidal drag. Basically, it's trading off the speed. The day is getting longer, and the moon is spiraling out, taking that energy of the Earth's rotation and using it to climb higher. And it's been doing that.
And that's the problem with the problem with rotational welfare. Is you got these bottom feeders who just slow down the rest of us. But
yeah, we can measure that, and that gets the thing of. Speaking of measuring distance, they left all these cute little retroreflectors on the moon when they did the Apollo and some of the Soviet rover missions. And we can use those to measure the distance from the telescope to the retroreflector with about that much error.
Yeah.
Now, I was reading an article about that, and they said that one of the things they had to take into account was land tides.
Oh, fuck.
The land that the observatory is sitting on, the solid ground goes up and down.
Oh, tides.
Tides.
Nothing is fucking. There is no standard.
The Earth isn't solid. It has a liquid core.
This is all.
It's all floating.
It's all a sham. This is all facade. This idea of standards and constants. This is all bullshit. Nothing's constant.
Well, the standards are. I mean, it's like, that's all based on, and we can get that accuracy for those things because that's electromagnetic radiation and time, we can measure those much more accurately than we can measure physical length by comparing. The length of a solid object is squishy.
Yeah,
but light and time are much more consistent.
Or is it like land tides, which I can't wrap my I'm going to write that down, but that's because that's about to fucking blow my brain out like Kurt Cobain. Woo. But for land tides or things where you're measuring something like with 1,000th of, and it's like, this says it's perfect, this says it's perfect, this says it's clearly not. What if we just aren't measuring light to a far enough decimal point? What if we were like, it's perfect, but what if we got out to like 1,000 decimal points and we actually found out that there was like light tides?
Well, it's general relativity has effects on electromagnetic radiation too. One of the practical applications of general relativity is that the GPS system has to measure time so accurately that the fact that time doesn't flow at the same rate in geosynchronous orbit or at the it's not geo, it's a little lower than that, but where the satellites are, the force of the Earth's gravity is less. And general relativity says that means time travels at a slightly different rate. And they have to take that into account because they are measuring the path length from the satellite to your car so accurately that difference would cause an error in your position calculation.
I was reading something about, like, I don't remember what. I don't think it was the U2, but it was something about like stability, and they found that it wasn't stable over certain parts of the world, and it's because when they like mapped it gravitationally, they were like, fuck, this thing's so fragile that like if it goes over this part of the world, it's like, oh, tugs a little too hard.
Well, the magnetic field is like that.
Yeah.
I don't think Earth's gravitational field is that bad, but the moon's gravitational field is that bad.
If you map the gravity of the world, there are parts where, I mean, granted, it's like it's fractions of a fraction, but there are parts where it's slightly over mountains and over the sea.
Now, we have sold laboratory analytical balances that had, as part of their setup, you had to put where they are in the world so that they could apply a corrective factor for the force of the Earth's gravitational field, as it's slightly different in different parts of the world.
I can't handle this right now, Roger. I am sober and I can't handle this. This is ripping my brain apart. So are there things like, so I was thinking like, it's like flat Earth, right? If you look at the Earth and it's flat out to a number of decimal points, and it's like, I think it was Asimov who did a little short story about it. My buddy Trey Carney showed it to me, and it's talking about like the 23rd decimal place, where it's like for like the first 20 decimal points, the Earth looks, whether it's flat or whether it's rounded, it looks the same. And it's not until you get that last part that you can see it starts to turn. Well, I started thinking, what if the actual universe itself is on like the surface of a sphere? And what if that has an effect over, it's like we think it's just one big thing, but it's actually on a surface. Then I started thinking, what if like parts of the universe aren't expanding as fast as the other parts? Are there like Coriolis effects for us looking at light from quasars and pulsars and red shifts and blue shifts? I need some marijuana. That will help me.
That is one of the things that they are currently studying. The way that they figured out how old the universe is, if you recall, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember when 10 billion and 20 billion were equally good guesses for the age of the universe.
That's what.
And in the early 21st century,
13.7.
They narrowed that down to 13.6. And the way that they did that was by studying the cosmic background radiation.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's modeled. There is a slight variation.
God damn it.
In the pattern. And the size of the variations has to be within the size of the universe at that time when we're looking at that radiation, because in order for a model to all be the same intensity, it had to be within range for light to communicate, to keep it the same intensity. And so it's, basically the size of the modeling in the background radiation determines the maximum possible age of the universe. And this is a really super elegant argument that came out of nowhere as far as I kind of understand it, but it's like, how did they fucking think of this? But it comes down to one part of the universe to communicate, for one part of the universe to communicate with another. For example, for a feature in space to all be the same, for it to be blinking, okay, it has to be small enough for light to communicate across it in the period of a blink.
Yeah.
So it can synchronize itself.
Yeah.
And that's how we can tell that if a thing is blinking at a certain rate, it can't be bigger than a certain size.
Yeah.
And that's what blows people's minds about some of these like really distant phenomena that we can tell are 10 billion years away, and we can see them from here, but they can't be any bigger than our solar system because they change brightness in a synchronized way in a matter of hours. So that means that something has to be pouring out just stupidly incredible amounts of energy from a very small object. And we can tell that from here because that's the only way that such a physical process could work. Even if we don't know what the process is, we can tell what its limits are, and what its parameters, how much energy it's putting out, what that density is. And in a lot of cases, it's just like, well, there's only a few things that can explain this, and most of them are black holes. So,
fuck, right. And then there's, I was going to say, I think I brought this up with you. Like, how do we know that, it's like if you had a camera that didn't have a high enough frame rate, and like I shot a bullet or whatever, you could only capture, or you could never capture it in that frame, right? It would be like, well, you don't know what's happening beneath that frame rate. That's what I was thinking, is like, I think it was with you I asked this too. What if the speed of light isn't like the smallest possible space is like the speed of light over Planck time? because it's the fastest thing over the shortest time, so that has to be the smallest space. But what if there's something happening?
But the Planck distance is way smaller than anything we can measure, so we don't really have any way to probe that at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's kind of doubtful with currently conceivable technology that we will.
I mean, fuck, we're still trying not to get we're trying to wipe the rust off of our gauge blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we left the gauge blocks in the fucking pickup truck. So, you know the LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Observatory, they can detect black holes colliding and all that. Those signals, that you remember, these things is miles long, L-shaped things. So they're measuring this mile-long thing against this miles-long thing, and the distance change that they are measuring is like 1/4 of the diameter of a proton.
Fuck.
It is like, how are they fucking doing that? And there were, I read an article, they were even like, oh yeah, if there was a collision like this in the Milky Way, we probably wouldn't be able to study it because it would swamp the dynamic range of our instrument. It would be too loud. They built this thing to study shit that was happening 10 billion light years away.
I can't handle this. But
this is the thing though. When you start looking at things like Apollo denialism and the flat earthers and all, it's like there is so much like this, and it all fits together so perfectly, and it all works so well. And in fact, so much of our world wouldn't even be possible if any of that wasn't true.
Yeah.
That it's like, okay, I understand. It makes you uncomfortable to think that we are in this infinitesimal speck of dust hanging in the middle of a vacuum, in the middle of nowhere, and the whole universe is 50 orders of magnitude bigger than we are. But you know what? If that's not the case, you got a whole shitload of explaining to do as to why things work.
Yeah.
Because it's not why things don't work. It's not why, but things work.
Yeah.
And stupidly precise things work reliably. And you have to deal with that. It's these measurements from satellites and all, everything adds up.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, and there are a few things like dark energy. Dark energy drives people nuts because we don't know what it is. We don't know why the universe is expanding. But that is a very different thing to not understand than whether the Earth is flat or round. I mean, those two things are not similar levels of doubt.
You can't put them together. You can't be like, all right, you know what? Like, I don't understand calculus, so no wonder I can't tie my shoes. And it's like, no, bro. Like, yes, they're on the spectrum of things you don't understand, but those are not the same.
Yeah, and so it's this is the thing, is that there are worlds out there of things like, this is why I wanted to show you these.
Yeah.
Today's entire talk was to get to the gauge blocks and the magic sticking together, and we don't know after using these industrially for 120 years why they stick together when we ring them. But it's a very useful thing that we use every day. And if someone ever does figure it out, they probably got a Nobel Prize waiting for them.
Roger, let's figure it out, because now I'm curious. I thought you were going to tell me the answer when you're like, why do they work? I was trying to guess it. I was not expecting no one knows.
It's one of those things that blows people's minds. It's like you can tell whenever people are being taught about gauge blocks, you can tell the guy, whoever is teaching about gauge blocks, they are just waiting to get to the point where they can say, and we don't know why they stick together.
Yeah.
Because you're like, no, seriously, why do they stick? No, we really don't know. We use it every day, but we don't know why it works.
See,
and it was like, how can we not know why gauge blocks stick together? That's but it's just one of those things.
It just does it, right? It's almost kind of like the consciousness, right? Like the hard question, like how does 3.5 pounds of protoplasm create thoughts and humor? And it's like, it gets to a point where you're like we should find it out, but it also doesn't matter, right? It's like, if you have sexual intercourse, it will create another one. Like, you don't need to know how to build it. It just happens.
Well, and the thing is, there's a progression that has happened with everything that humans have come to understand, where you first understand that it happens.
Yeah. Don't
and
even
that
know
it's
why.
possible,
Fire.
and that it's consistent.
Yeah.
And then later you learn how and why it happens.
Like the fold drive.
Before you can learn how it happens, you have to know that it happens, and you have to be, you go through this period when you're just observing it.
Yeah.
And eventually the pieces fall together, and you come up with a way to explain it that maybe makes sense.
Yeah.
The number of things that have been explained in the last 20 years has been astonishing. Now you got to remember, when I was a kid, I had a book about the planets. That had an artist's impression of the surface of each planet, and that's what they were. They were artists' impressions.
Yeah.
They were drawings, like cartoon drawings, because that's all we had. Humans had never sent a probe to the surface of another planet. By the late 60s, we had actually sent a couple to the moon right before the Apollo program. But as far as Mars, Venus, all them crap, we had no idea what they looked like, and we were dead wrong about almost all of them when we actually got there. The thing about colliding black holes, colliding neutron stars, the LIGO thing. Now there's two observatories. There's LIGO and there's another one in Europe.
Lucifer.
And one day they got a signal that didn't look like two black holes colliding. It was different. And they realized that this was theoretically similar to what they would expect two neutron stars to look like when they're colliding. Now, there's a difference, though, between a black hole and a neutron star. You can see a neutron star because it's not a black hole.
Not infinite.
So they started to realize that this might be something that they could find with an optical telescope. So they had two observatories. They were fortunately both online at the same time. So they could they had a record of the time signal. And so they could reduce it to a ring.
Yeah, a parallax.
They could tell that it had to come from some point on a ring around the cotton ball, ring around the Earth, a ring around the universe.
Yeah.
And so they went looking for it. And with a couple of educated guesses, they found it. And what was interesting about that was there's always been a mystery about where the heavy metals like platinum and uranium and gold come from.
Yeah, the second.
And this one observation was loaded with atomic spectra for these heavy elements. And they realized that one observation single-handedly explained where all of those heavy elements in the universe came from. It was, it took something that had been a complete mystery and closed the book on it, because you could calculate the frequency of which these collisions were likely to happen and look at this one collision that we had observed and say, this is how much it created. This is how many of these things it created. We can integrate this over the length of over the time span of the universe and say, yep, that explains where all the gold came from.
Fuck.
And that happened in the 2010s.
Yeah, oh fuck yeah! I was gonna say because that was because there's that. They know the first round of supernovas, right? That's what bumped us up to helium. Yeah, they know that. And
the first rounds of supernovas get you to iron. Yeah. Because when the star is dying, it starts to, it goes from burning hydrogen to burning helium, which gets you up to carbon, which gets you up to nitrogen, the heavier elements, up to iron. And the problem is when you fuse iron, it takes energy instead of releasing energy. Yeah. So after iron, you get bupkis until the implosion. And the implosion creates such high pressures that you get some higher level elements out of it. But none of the theoretical models could account for the amount of these elements that we see are actually here on Earth, where we can study them. Yeah. And, with this one observation of a neutron star collision billions of light years away, it was like, oh, that's where it came from. It's like when, the age of the universe. 13.6 billion years. It used to be like, well, it's probably at least 10, and it might be as much as 20. And that was considered very learned, because you got to remember when Edwin Hubble started doing his sky surveys, no one even knew that anything existed beyond the Milky Way.
Yeah, island universes. Yeah. Yeah, they're like, what the fuck is that? Is that another galaxy? Like, bullshit.
And yeah, it's like, is that a galaxy like ours?
Yeah, right. That was like Christopher Columbus going across the ocean. Like, bullshit, this is India.
Then you have like the Hubble Deep Field, and it's like, not only there are a lot of galaxies, there's a whole metric fuck ton of galaxies.
Yeah, and the ultra deep, there's the ultra deep field, and then I think they did the extreme deep field, and it's just like, it's just ammo for smoking pot when you're 20. That's all it is. Just going deeper, and then there's even more, and then it's. Yeah, but I remember learning that in astronomy. It was like a type of supernova. It was like a hypernova or something. And it's like in an instant, like part of the core, it was like the core of the core or something. It went from the size of Jupiter to the size of like a marble in like, in like an attosecond. And then what happened is the whole thing collapsed inwards. But then when it would collapse inwards, and when the innermost sphere would hit itself, right, it would send a shockwave of equal and opposite pressure, I guess, in the opposite direction, or an equal and opposite shockwave. But the outside of the star hadn't finished collapsing yet. So it was like when a light turns green and everyone starts going, so that was coming back out at the same speed that one was coming in, and it was just that like gang bang of supernovas that were like, that was like a theoretical of how we could get past iron. But that was in 2010, so that was probably before the discovery. So fuck, I'm old now.
Yeah, they were trying to work it out, and it was just not. They were trying different scenarios, and it was just not adding up.
Yeah, they said they could.
That happens a lot. The thing about science is that science isn't always about having the correct explanation or about it working. Sometimes it's about asking the right question and waiting until you have enough information to form a theory that you can test and that you can then you can say, sometimes it all comes together like that, and you can say, well, now that we've seen this, which we had never seen before, we can say, well, there's this many neutron stars in the galaxy. Okay, so this is the frequency. It's like, okay, that explains where all these heavy elements came from.
Yeah,
and that doesn't happen too often. Yeah. And it's kind of amazing when it does. But the bigger thing that people don't appreciate about science and engineering is, again, things like this. This is so ordinary, and yet it is so special.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
It was a little easier for me because I did some finite element analysis work back in the aughts when I was playing with alternative home construction. And when you do a finite element analysis on a structure, it exaggerates all of the stress things, the changes in dimension and the stresses. So you can see how your structure is deforming. It magnifies those deformations when it does the animation. So you can kind of see the rubberiness of solid matter in a computer simulation. But the thing is, again, most people don't even know these things exist, and they're fundamental to our entire modern world.
I didn't. I mean, I knew from there's like that example.
Yeah. I've spent my entire life studying, working in a field that's concerned with measurement, and I didn't know they existed until a few years ago. So, unless you have some reason to work with them, then you've probably never seen one.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I was thinking of like, so like when we learned that in astronomy, and this was like August 2010 when I learned that, and they were like, that outwards colliding and that inwards colliding, and they're like, that could explain the creation, but they're like, that only creates a little bit per hypernova, and so it couldn't do the whole thing. But then I got thinking, as you were saying, looking out at these external elements. Well, then we can look at the atomic spectra of shit and see which planets have oxygen or organic molecules. What if we could find the limit to which the upper limit of naturally occurring heavy elements? What if we could start creating synthetic elements that were still stable but just can't happen by accident, like element 250? But then what if we could start looking out at like nebula and shit, or seeing other planets and seeing if we could get the atomic spectra of these going off, and would that mean there's another intelligent civilization nearby, because that's the only way you could get element 250?
Well,
oh, fuck, it would have to be a star. Never mind.
Now that we have the neutron star thing, you're pretty much going to get everything possible as a neutron star falls apart, because it's the opposite of taking small elements and combining them into bigger ones. There you have what amounts to a giant atomic nucleus, and it's unstable, so it's falling apart. It's actually fissioning.
Roger, don't ruin my fun. I just had my eureka moment, and you just took it from me. I barely even held the trophy.
The other problem is how long they last.
Island stability.
One of the things that I was struck by, because it had never occurred to me, is, you've heard of the natural nuclear reactor down in Africa.
It's like 2 billion years old. Yeah.
And one of the reasons that was possible was that 2 billion years ago, all of the uranium on Earth
the half-life
had more U-235 in it because of the half-life.
Fuck.
And so it was what we would consider enriched uranium. All the uranium in the entire world was enriched by modern standards. So it wasn't as difficult to get a fission reaction going
to build
in a structure like that. Well, or at least a nuclear reactor. But prompt fission reactions probably not going to happen naturally. But
like if you could go back in time, you would just be able to probably be a lot less of a hassle to make fissile material.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't need as large of an industrial thing, but you would still need quite a bit, because you're talking about, like 1.4% versus 90%.
Yeah.
So you would still need to enrich it to a certain extent. But it would make it a lot easier to build a reactor to generate plutonium, which you would still then have to process chemically in order to extract it and all the stuff that we did at Hanford. But it's like you might have done it for maybe $750 million instead of $2 billion in 1945 dollars.
You know how now we don't even try to find nuclear enrichment plants. What we do is just try to find nuclear material, and we just track the flow of that to see where it's being brought to process. It's easier to do that than it is to try to find every nuke. What if there was a form of temporal, I don't know, not terrorism, but it'd be the temporal police would be they'd go up to some nation, go up to Iran and be like, we see you're going to 2 billion BC Africa an awful lot lately. What, we just... Can a guy just time travel? And it's could we see what's in your bag?
If people were time traveling, anyone who knew about it would be freaking right the fuck out, because it had so many really weird implications.
I don't know how much more of this my brain can handle, Roger. You have already thoroughly destroyed it.
Oh, you'll get used to it. People can get used to anything. That's...
Well,
so I just ripped your worldview apart.
I just get. Hey, well, on a darker note,
you'll thank me in the morning.
On a darker note of getting used to stuff and tolerances, dude. I had on a woman earlier, not Mitzi, but Christy Wells, and we talked. That episode was before this. That'll be uploaded tomorrow. Human trafficking and child sex trafficking. Fucking. Not actually, you know what? Let's not end this on a demonic dark note. Anyway, Roger.
We've been talking about fucking miracles of modern technology.
And of course, I had to bring in satanic rituals. Hey, did you hear about this? Fuck, man. Fuck, Roger. I appreciate that. Let's wrap this one up, and let me check right now before we even scooch. Let me. What day is today? We are in November. Yeah. What do you want? Do you want Sunday or do you want Monday?
Either works out. Whatever you think would work better for you.
I got a Sunday midday with a guy that's already been on, Ed Morales, but I'd
rather do, but let's do the weekday then, because that way I'm not. haven't had as much wine to drink before the.
All right.
Because I've been at work. Yeah. Now you do realize one day I'm going to show up and I'm going to be like, I had no idea what the fuck I want to talk about. What do you want to talk about, Tommy?
I don't give a fuck. No, I've been thinking about that. One day you're going to show up without a topic, and you know what? It's going to be a beautiful thing because you and I are just going to riff. Because we have yet to riff. We always come in with a topic. One day we're just going to riff, and we're going to, you know what? It'll be the first moment. It'll be like it'll be the early universe. It'll be the first moment that like gluon stuck together. Who knows? In the beginning, the universe was created, and it's been widely criticized as a controversial move. One day, you're going to show up without a topic, and it's either going to be for the better or worse. But we're going to bravely.
People have been complaining to God about it ever since.
Yeah. We're going to bravely go.
Why did you do that?
We're going to bravely go where no podcast has gone before. Because you and I come in here, and we have scaffolding, we have topics. So every once in a while. You know what? Whenever I have a drink again, one day I'll have one. Maybe when the podcast gets to like 1 million subscribers, you and I are going to get shit-faced, and we'll do like an 8-hour episode. That's probably going to be like 5 years from now, probably like 2025. We'll get shit-faced on Grand Marnier. We'll just get blackout drunk, and we're just going to dive into it. And we're going to talk about synthesizing elements. We're just going to go until we vomit and pass out. The episode is just going to end. The final hour is just going to be both of us snoring until someone wakes up and turns it off.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds like a plan. All right, so I'll put you down for Pearl Harbor, December 7th. All right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll do 5 o'clock again. My time, 6 years.
Yeah. Whatever works best for you. Is this best time?
Yeah, because the nice thing is it's not early enough to interfere too much with work. I can knock off a little early to do my final preps, but it's also not so late that I can't watch a TV show or something afterward if I want to. I got a DVD in the mail from Netflix. The parrot is kind of tapping his feet. It's. I had a few rabbits to pull out of hats from.
Good. My goal is to drain them all out of you until I get you to show up and you go, I got nothing, and that's where the magic's going to be.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Hey, dude, necessity's the mother of invention, and desperation's the drunk uncle. So we're going to figure this shit out.
That sounds. Yep, that'll work. Okay, it'll be magic. I'll let you know if I think of something.
All right, my man. Well, I'll send you a link right now I'm trying to stagger episodes more because I've realized when I do like 2 a day, I'll do 2 a day for a week and I'll put out 14, and I realize no one watches 14. So now I'm just putting them out 1 a day. So I already have the episode for tomorrow, Christy Wells, for the child trafficking. That's going to upload tomorrow. And then I'm going to cue this one to upload on Wednesday morning. So this one's not going to be up until Wednesday, just FYI.
Okay.
Not that you were requesting, but...
Yeah, well, the guy who loaned me the Gage Blocks is probably going to appreciate a link to it. And
fuck yeah. Fuck yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll get them up. But then there's also me just being me. This one might upload, and I'll be like, fuck it, it's uploaded. I don't have any patience. I have the patience.
I think it does make sense to slow the pace down a little bit because you're going to get some fatigue and because I know I've been looking at a couple that I thought, well, this is turning out kind of interesting, but damn, he's put out quite a few of them lately, and I got stuff to do. So
Right now it's I'm sitting at this is episode.
And you've had some really damn good guests lately.
Thanks, man. So, it's not an accident. That was a lot of effort, and
I believe it.
I'm out of my long line of guests, and so now I'm in this like scramble mode of like, fuck, I gotta this just improv. I'm like, put it all together. So now I'm emailing a bunch of people. I've been trying to email a bunch of authors, and then I go to Google them and they're dead. I've been really upset about that recently.
Don't you hate it when that happens?
It's fucking selfish, is what it is. I'll tell you, bud. Back when I was a kid, they didn't know where heavy elements came from, and Pluto was a planet. But all right, Roger, let's wrap this bitch up. I gotta go piss and go eat. Not that you asked, and not that you needed to know that, but thanks as always, man. I fucking love our episodes, dude. I love Professor Roger. I love learning. All right, my man.
I enjoy bouncing stuff off of you. The look in your eyes when you were like realizing this can do 1,000th of an inch and all. I was and you were like, wow, boggling, and I'm like, you have no idea what I'm going to do next.
Bitch, look at my magic cape. You're like, what you want, man? I got 10,000, I got 100,000, I got a million. What you want, man? This is all black market measurement shit. What you need? Fuck yeah.
Hey.
But I appreciate it, Roger. All right, my man. Take it easy. Stay safe. God bless everybody. And, well, we're too close to Thanksgiving and too far from Christmas, so nobody gets a holiday wishing. Go fuck yourself. Later, Roger.
Possible to make changes in the exact moment a stressful situation presents